My name is Elias Crow, and this is a story that was told to me one winter night by a man who swore he was only passing it along because it wouldn't let him sleep anymore. The storm came in without warning, the kind that turns a highway into a white tunnel and makes you forget where you're headed. I was driving north through upstate New York, late December, radio hissing static, when I saw the headlights ahead of me slow and vanish. The road dipped, the snow thickened, and suddenly I was alone. That was when I saw the house. It wasn't on any map. A 2-story farmhouse set back from the road, porch light glowing a soft, patient yellow. Smoke rose from the chimney in a way that looked almost deliberate, like someone had practiced it. I told myself I'd just stop long enough to get directions, maybe warm up. My phone had lost signal 10 miles back, and the cold had that sharp, needling bite that works its way through your coat and into your bones. The porch boards creaked under my boots. Before I could knock, the door opened. The man who stood there was tall and narrow, gray-haired, with eyes so pale they almost reflected the porch light. He smiled like he'd been expecting me. "Storm will keep you if you let it," he said. The warmth inside the house hit me like a memory. Wood smoke, old books, something simmering on the stove. A fire crackled in the living room, and a woman sat in a rocking chair near it, knitting. She looked up as I came in, her eyes dark and calm. "You're welcome to wait it out," she said. I don't know why I trusted them. Maybe because the storm howled outside like an animal, and the house felt solid, real, anchored in a way the world beyond the windows didn't. We sat, we drank coffee. The man introduced himself as Thomas, the woman was Ruth. No last name, no small talk about where they were from. Just a sense that time had slowed, stretched thin like taffy. At some point, Thomas leaned back in his chair and looked at me with that same pale-eyed focus. Ruth's knitting needles paused. The fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney. I laughed, a little too loudly. They told me the story then, or maybe it told itself through them. Back in the winter of 1911, the farmhouse belonged to the Calder family. Ezra Calder built it with his own hands after the railroad bypassed the town and left it slowly bleeding people. He had a wife, Miriam, and a daughter, Lucy. The winters were brutal, but Ezra believed in staying put. Said the land remembered you if you stayed long enough. That winter came early. Snow piled up faster than anyone expected. Trains stopped running. Roads disappeared. Neighbors became rumors. Ezra fell ill first, a fever that wouldn't break. Miriam did what she could, melting snow for water, feeding the fire until the woodpile shrank to nothing. Lucy, only 8, watched from the stairs, quiet as a shadow. When the food ran low, Miriam wrapped herself in Ezra's coat and walked into the storm to reach the next farm over. She never came back. Days passed. Ezra's fever burned him hollow. Lucy learned how quiet a house could be when it was waiting. She listened to the walls creak, the wind claw at the shutters. She talked to her father even when he couldn't answer. On the 7th night after her mother left, Lucy heard knocking at the door. Ezra was unconscious. The fire was nearly out. Lucy went to the door anyway. A man stood on the porch, snow crusted into his beard, eyes wide with hunger and fear. He said his name was Samuel. He said he'd been lost. He said he needed shelter. Lucy hesitated. Her mother had warned her about strangers. But the storm was screaming and the man was shivering so hard his teeth rattled. She let him in. Samuel ate like he'd never stop. He stared at the fire, at the house, like he was memorizing it. When Lucy asked about her mother, he shook his head. She didn't make it past the ridge, he said. Lucy cried then, small and soundless. Samuel watched her with something like regret. That night, Lucy woke to voices. Her father's bedroom door was open. Samuel stood over Ezra's bed, holding a pillow. Lucy screamed. Samuel turned, eyes wild, and lunged for her. They struggled. The candle fell. Fire took the curtains, then the walls. Smoke filled the house. By morning, the storm had passed. Neighbors found the farmhouse burned to its bones. Inside were 3 bodies: Ezra Calder, Samuel the Drifter, and a child they identified by a half-melted locket. Miriam Calder was never found. Thomas took a breath. The fire snapped loudly. "That should be the end of it," he said. The house was rebuilt years later. Different family, different name. But winters stayed cruel, and travelers kept going missing along that stretch of road. People said they saw a porch light when there shouldn't be one, said they heard knocking in the snow. Ruth looked at me then, her eyes deep and steady. "The dead don't always know they're finished," she said. A sound came from upstairs. Soft footsteps. Slow. Careful, I hadn't noticed the staircase before. I asked. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lucy," he said. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. A small shape stood there, just out of the firelight. I could see the edge of a dress, the pale suggestion of bare feet. The temperature in the room dropped. My breath fogged. "She doesn't like strangers staying too long," Ruth said gently. The porch light flickered. I stood, heart hammering. "I think the storm's letting up," I said. I didn't know if it was true. I just knew I needed to leave. Thomas nodded. The door opened easily. The snow outside had thinned to a quiet, drifting fall. My car sat where I'd left it, engine cold but intact. As I stepped off the porch, I heard Lucy's voice for the first time. It was thin, hopeful. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I drove until dawn, until the sky went pale and the road widened and the world felt solid again. When I checked my map later, there was no farmhouse marked where I'd stopped. Just a bend in the road, unnamed. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of exhaustion and cold. Years passed. Then, last winter, I was visiting a small historical society in a town not far from where I'd been stranded. An old man was giving a talk about lost settlements and winter deaths. Afterward, he pulled me aside. He asked. I told him I had. He nodded slowly. "Funny thing," he said. "We found something in the archives, a journal. According to the journal, Miriam never died in the storm. She reached the neighboring farm and was taken in. By the time she recovered weeks later, the road back had closed. When she finally returned in spring, the farmhouse was ash. Her family was gone. She wrote that she stayed nearby for years, watching the road in winter, lighting a lamp in the hope that Lucy might somehow find her way home. The old man's voice dropped. Miriam Calder died in that same farmhouse decades later. I asked him who lived there now. He looked at me puzzled. No one, he said. That night as I drove home through falling snow, I saw a porch light ahead glowing warm and patient, waiting for someone to stop. I didn't. Story number 2. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this story was told to me by a woman named Claire Hollis on a frozen January morning, the kind that makes every sound feel brittle, like it might shatter if you breathe too hard. I was working the early shift at a gas station off Route 12 in northern Michigan, the last stop before miles of forest and lake effect snow. Claire came in just after dawn, boots caked with ice, eyes rimmed red like she hadn't slept. She bought coffee she never drank and stood by the heater as if she were afraid to step back outside. She asked me. I said no. She nodded once like she'd expected that. Good. Pine Hollow was a logging town once. Not big, not important, just a pocket of houses carved out of the woods near Lake Superior. The kind of place that exists because trees are there and disappears when they're gone. In 1934, only a few families remained, including the Wilkes family, Harold Wilkes, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 sons, Matthew and Jonah. Harold was a winter man. He trusted snow more than people. Said it made things honest. Eleanor hated it. She kept journals filled with pressed flowers and dreams of warmer places. Matthew was 16, already tall and bitter, counting the days until he could leave. Jonah was 7, quiet, always listening. That winter was the coldest anyone could remember. The lake froze thick enough to walk across. Supply trucks stopped coming. Radios went silent. Pine Hollow became an island of smoke and frost. On January 17th, Harold didn't come home from checking the traps. Eleanor sent Matthew out before nightfall. He came back alone, face pale, saying he'd found Harold's coat near the tree line, stiff with ice but no sign of his father. Snow started falling harder, swallowing tracks as soon as they were made. By morning, the road out of town was gone. They waited 3 days. On the 4th night, someone knocked on the Wilkes' door. Eleanor opened it to find a man standing in the snow, hat in his hands. He said his name was Peter Callahan. Said his car had slid off the road miles back. Said he'd been walking for hours. Matthew didn't trust him. Jonah hid behind the stairs, watching. Peter's eyes kept drifting past them into the house, lingering on the fire, the table, the sense of being indoors. Eleanor let him stay. That night, Eleanor dreamed of Harold standing at the edge of the woods, mouth open, trying to speak. When she woke, the house was quiet, too quiet. Peter was gone. So was Jonah. They found Jonah's footprints leading toward the trees, small and uneven, like he'd been half-dragged. Matthew followed them until the cold burned his lungs. The tracks ended abruptly near the old logging road. No struggle, no blood, just snow, smooth and untouched. The town searched until their hands went numb. They never found Jonah or Peter Callahan. After that, Pine Hollow began to empty faster. One family left, then another. Houses went dark. Fires went out. Matthew left the following spring and never came back. Eleanor stayed. She said Jonah would return in winter. Said she heard him sometimes, tapping at the windows when the snow piled high. Neighbors claimed they heard it too. Small knocks, always after dark, always followed by a child's voice calling a name. In 1942, Pine Hollow officially ceased to exist, but winters kept coming. Claire paused there, fingers white around her cup. Outside, snow slid off the awning in a soft rush. "My family bought land near there 10 years ago," she said. Didn't know the history. She moved there with her husband, Mark Hollis, and their daughter, Lily. The first winter was mild. The second was not. Claire said Lily started talking about a boy she met near the woods. Said his name was Jonah. Said he was cold and couldn't find his way home. Mark laughed it off. Claire didn't. One night during a blizzard, Mark went out to check the generator and didn't come back. Claire waited until her fear outweighed the cold and followed his tracks with a flashlight. They ended at the tree line. Inside the house, Lily stood by the door, hand on the knob. "He's knocking," Lily said. Claire grabbed her and pulled her back as something thudded softly against the wood. Once. Twice. A boy's voice drifted through the door, thin and patient. Claire never opened it. They left the next morning, abandoning everything. Mark's body was found in spring, frozen upright against a tree, eyes open, mouth filled with snow. The official report said, exposure. Claire leaned closer to me then. "Pine Hollow doesn't want adults," she said. "It wants families. It wants warmth." She left without another word. That night, driving home through the snow, I passed a stand of trees I didn't remember seeing before. Between them, set back just far enough to notice, was a house with a single light glowing in the window. A child stood outside, watching the road. I kept driving. Sometimes, when winter is especially quiet, I still hear knocking in the wind, and a boy's voice calling out names that aren't mine, yet sound like they could be. Story number 3. My name is Samuel Ridgway, and this story was given to me by a man called Thomas Hale while we waited out a blizzard in a county shelter in eastern Colorado. He told it like a confession, slow and careful, as if saying it wrong might make it start again. Thomas grew up near a place called White Crossing, a stretch of road that cuts through open prairie and disappears into nothing for miles. No trees, no houses, just snow, wind, and a railroad track that hadn't been used since before he was born. When Thomas was 12, his family lived in a rented farmhouse near that crossing. His father, Robert Hale, worked highway maintenance. His mother, June Hale, taught at the local elementary school. Thomas had a younger sister named Annie, who still believed winter meant magic instead of danger. The storm came the week before Christmas. It started with snow, slow and steady. Then the wind arrived like it had been waiting its turn. Roads closed. Power lines snapped. The radio crackled with emergency warnings that all sounded the same. Robert went out with his truck to help clear stranded cars and told June he'd be back by nightfall. He wasn't. By midnight, the wind was screaming hard enough to shake the house. June tried the radio again and again. Nothing. Thomas watched Annie build a little village out of salt shakers and cups on the kitchen table, humming to herself like everything was normal. Just after 1 a.m, someone knocked on the front door. Not loud, not urgent. 3 slow taps. June froze. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. Nobody came down that road in weather like this. Everybody knew that. The knocking came again. June told Thomas to stay with Annie. She grabbed Robert's old shotgun from the closet and opened the door just enough to look out. A woman stood on the porch. She wore a long coat dusted white with snow, dark hair plastered to her face. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, like she'd been walking for too long. "My name is Margaret Bell," she said. "My car's stuck by the crossing. Please." June hesitated. The wind howled between words. Annie slipped free of Thomas's grip and peeked around the corner. The woman's eyes flicked to Annie, and something in her expression softened. "Please," Margaret said again. June let her in. Margaret sat by the heater and held her hands out, palms trembling. She thanked June over and over. She smiled at Annie and asked her name. Annie smiled back. Thomas didn't like the way Margaret watched the hallway, or how she flinched whenever the wind gusted like she was listening for something else underneath it. After a while, Margaret asked if she could use the bathroom. June pointed down the hall. Margaret didn't come back. They found her standing in Annie's bedroom, staring at the small bed like it offended her. "I had a daughter," Margaret said quietly. June told her it was time to go back to the living room. Her hand shook on the shotgun. Margaret turned slowly. Her face looked older now, stretched thin, like the warmth had taken something out of her. "She froze," Margaret said, "at White Crossing." The lights flickered. "She's still out there," Margaret went on. "She cries when the wind blows right." June told Thomas later that Margaret smiled then, wide and desperate. The front door slammed open on its own. Snow blasted into the house, scattering papers and rattling the windows. Annie screamed. Thomas ran to her just as a sound cut through the storm. A thin, high wail, rising and falling with the wind. "Mom," Annie whispered. Margaret stepped toward her. "She just wants to come in," she said. June raised the shotgun. "Get out," she said. Margaret's face twisted, grief and fury tangling together. "You don't understand," she said. The wind screamed louder. The wailing came closer, right outside the walls. Annie started toward the door. Thomas grabbed her, screaming her name. June fired the shotgun into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. The sound echoed like thunder. Margaret shrieked, a sound that didn't sound human at all, and bolted for the door. It flew open and she vanished into the snow like she'd been pulled. The door slammed shut behind her. Silence followed, deep and heavy. The wailing was gone. They didn't sleep that night. In the morning, the storm broke. The world lay buried and bright as if nothing bad had ever happened. They found Margaret Bell's body half a mile down the road, frozen solid, eyes open. No footprints led away from her. At White Crossing, they found a small mound of snow beside the road. Under it was a child's coat and one tiny shoe. No body. Robert Hale was found 2 days later in his truck, alive but frostbitten and shaken. He said he'd heard crying near the crossing and almost stopped to look. Almost. The Hales moved away that spring. Thomas told me he never forgot the sound of that crying, the way it seemed to know Annie's name. Years later, after his parents passed, Thomas returned to White Crossing out of something like obligation. The road was abandoned now. The crossing sign rusted and bent. He said the wind picked up suddenly, carrying a familiar sound, a child crying. Then a woman's voice, faint but hopeful. "Margaret," it called. Thomas didn't stop. He told me that sometimes, when winter storms hit just right, people still report knocking on farmhouse doors along that road, a woman asking to warm up, a child crying in the wind. The blizzard eased by morning. The shelter opened its doors. Thomas Hale was gone. Driving home, I passed an empty stretch of road where the snow drifted just a little too evenly, like something beneath it was breathing slow and patient, waiting for someone to listen. Story number 4. My name is Andrew Calloway, and this story was told to me by a retired state trooper named Helen Brooks while we sat in her kitchen during a long, quiet snowfall in western Pennsylvania. She said she'd kept it to herself for 30 years because every time she told it, winter seemed to linger longer than it should. Helen worked Route 219 most of her career, a 2-lane road that snakes through forest and hills, where radio signals fade and snow settles deep. She knew every mile marker, every pull-off, every place where accidents happened more than once. "There's a stretch near mile 47, she told me, hands wrapped around her mug. In February of 1989, Helen was finishing a double shift when the call came in. Single vehicle stalled, no injuries reported, driver waiting by the road, temperature well below zero. The driver's name was Mark Ellison. Helen found his car half buried in snow, hazards blinking weakly. Mark stood outside, stamping his feet, face red and panicked. He was 32, a school counselor from Ohio, driving back from visiting his sister. "My heater quit," he said. Then the engine died. "I thought I saw a house down the road, but I don't know." Helen got him into her cruiser, cranked the heat, called for a tow. That should have been it. But Mark didn't calm down. He kept turning in his seat, looking back at the bend in the road they'd just passed. He asked. Helen said. "A kid," he said. Helen didn't hear anything. Just wind brushing the trees. They waited. The tow truck was delayed. Another accident farther south. Snow thickened, swallowing the road. That was when Helen heard it. Soft, broken. A child sobbing somewhere out in the dark. Mark's hands clenched. "That's her," he said. "The girl," he said. Helen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Mark said that when his car died, he'd gotten out and walked a little way down the road, thinking he'd seen a porch light through the trees. Instead, he found a girl standing near the bend. She was barefoot. She wore a thin nightgown and hugged herself like she was trying to disappear. Her hair was dark and matted with snow. I asked her where her parents were, Mark said. Helen knew the area. No houses for miles. No families with children. You didn't pick her up, Helen said. Mark shook his head. I tried. She backed away. The crying came again, closer now. Helen stepped out of the cruiser, flashlight cutting through the snow. The beam caught the trees, the ditch, the road curving away into darkness. At the bend, the light landed on a small shape. A girl stood there, just as Mark described. Bare feet, blue with cold, nightgown torn at the hem. Her eyes were too dark, too empty. Sweetheart, Helen called. Come here. The girl looked past her straight at Mark. You came back, she said. Mark started to cry. The girl tilted her head. Snow drifted through her like smoke. I can't feel my hands, she said. Helen felt the world narrow, tighten. Training told her to move, to act. Something else told her not to step any closer. Helen asked. The girl raised her arm and pointed. Not toward the woods, but down the road, deeper into the bend. I was walking, she said. Mark took a step forward. Helen grabbed his coat. The girl's mouth stretched into something that might have been a smile. He stayed with the car, she said. The crying rose again, no longer just hers. Other voices layered beneath it. Thin, distant, overlapping. Helen backed toward the cruiser, pulling Mark with her. Get in the car, she said. The girl's face changed. Not angry, hurt. You said you'd help, she whispered. Mark wrenched free and stumbled toward her. Helen shouted his name. The wind surged, snow whipping hard enough to sting. For a moment, everything vanished into white. When it cleared, Mark was gone. The road was empty. The crying stopped. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. They searched until dawn. They found Mark's footprints leading toward the bend and stopping abruptly in the middle of the road. No tracks beyond that, no body. The official report listed him as missing, presumed exposure. Helen didn't believe that. She started digging. Old records, newspaper clippings, handwritten reports from the 1950s. She found a story about a man named Raymond Keller, whose car broke down at Cold Child Bend during a storm in 1952. He left his daughter Emily Keller in the car while he went for help. He never made it back. Emily's body was found in spring, frozen less than half a mile from the car, barefoot, nightgown torn. Her father's body was never recovered. After that, there were others, drivers who vanished, reports of a crying child, a girl seen walking the road in winter storms. Always the same bend, always someone who stopped. Helen transferred out of that district the next year, but winter has a way of carrying things. She told me that even now people call in reports during heavy snow of a little girl standing by the road, asking for help, saying she's cold. Helen said quietly. She shook her head. As I drove home that night, snow falling thick and slow, my headlights caught a curve in the road I didn't recognize. For just a second, I thought I saw a small figure standing at the edge of the beam. Bare feet, thin dress. I didn't stop. Behind me, in the hush of the falling snow, something cried once, soft, hopeful. and then went quiet, waiting for the next car to slow down.